Hey folks, Chris here with the Houndsman XP Podcast. I'm your host, and I'm bringing you a show this week that is very important. As houndsmen, our future and the challenges of continuing to be able to do what we do is going to be largely based on being able to answer the question, is hunting with hounds fair chase? A few months ago, I released a podcast with Tracy Jones from Greenville, Tennessee. Tracy writes for Bear Hunting Magazine. He's also the grandson of Barry Tarleton, third or fourth generation bear hunter for sure. His son Ben Jones is also carrying on the legacy of Houston Valley Plots. And we talked in depth about fair chase. So I would encourage you to go back and find that podcast called Sacred Pursuit, because we really break it down. During that podcast, Tracy made a statement, and it has had me thinking about it ever since. And he's the one that posed the challenge, that our challenge moving forward is going to be whether or not hunting with hounds is fair chase, and our abilities to articulate that. And I'm not going to make this pre-roll real long, but I've got to lay it out, and I've got to tell you the importance of why I have this guest on our show. If we are to be able to convince the non-hunting public that hunting with hounds is fair chase, then we first need to convince the hunting public that what we do is valuable and what we do is ethical and what we do is the purest form of fair chase. Our guest this week is Nick Pinizzotto. And Nick is the president and CEO of the National Deer Association. They were formerly called Quality Deer Management Association, or QDMA. They've gone through a rebranding and a name change, but it's by far the most recognized national organization that represents deer hunters. Nick and I are going to talk about some of the barriers and issues and conflicts between deer hunters and us as houndsmen. It's very important that we understand the logistics behind this, understand different points of view. And I know that deer hunters can be challenging. They control a lot of property. They control a lot of narrative with fish and wildlife managers. They get a lot of the things that they want because they generate so many dollars in hunting revenue for not only the public, but also the government entities that make the fish and wildlife rules. And we're just going to discuss it. And I think the most important things that we need to remember here is if you want to reduce conflict, then find common ground to talk about. Nick grew up coon hunting in Pennsylvania. Until just recently, he had an English coonhound that he used for a really unique purpose, but he never lost his love for hounds, is the thing that I'm trying to get across here. The guy that sits at the top of one of the most recognized organizations in the world for whitetail deer management has a common thread with all of us, and that's a love for hounds. So it's very fitting that we start this conversation for the future of our lifestyle, and we're starting to build bridges with the Houndsman XP Podcast with some of these groups that want to help us. And sometimes we have to look at ourselves. If we want to help ourselves, we have to look at what we're doing and listen to what other people see in us and evaluate that. So Nick and I are going to break that down. When you listen to this podcast, listen with a critical ear. Ask yourself questions like, am I really doing everything that I can do to get along with the fellow hunters in my area? Ask yourself questions, are there things that I can do to improve to try to get along for the future of hound hunting? We can't look at deer hunters as the enemy. We've got to find ways to make them our allies, and that's what this podcast is all about. It's not about a legendary houndsman. It's not about a training tip. It's about how we make friends with the most powerful hunting group in the country. It's about the future of our survival. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Houndsman XP Podcast. Make sure that you're checking out everything that we've got going on over at houndsmenxp.com, on our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram. It's all out there, folks. Everything we do is to ensure a solid future for us as houndsmen. That's always been our goal. That's always been our mission. It may not always be what you want to hear, but I do try to bring you things that we all need to hear. Let's pick up this conversation and start building some bridges, folks. As Benjamin Franklin said, if we do not all hang together, surely we will all hang separately. Through all my years of working with hound organizations and representing houndsmen and being in hound groups, and I just hear the comments that, oh, you can never work with deer hunters. And those kind of comments make my skin crawl. And then from the deer hunting side, those folks have said, you know, houndsmen are the worst sportsmen in the world. And I know that's not true. So Nick and I are just going to have a conversation here and talk about what his organization is doing and how we can find some common ground in this thing, because before it's all over, then we're going to have to find that common ground. And this conversation isn't going to be a kumbaya. It's not going to be where we're, coming together on every issue and every topic, but we are going to discuss some things that might hurt your feelings. They might hurt some deer hunters' feelings, but we're still going to work to find the common ground. So Nick, I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and showing up to help us out with this.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So why don't you give us some background on the National Deer Association. I know you guys are running your own podcast over there, and you just give us a lowdown on the purpose, your mission, some brief history on the National Deer Association.
Sure. Yeah. And we do. We have a couple podcasts. We have Deer Season 365 and Coffee and Deer. And as you and I've talked before, I want to get you over on one of our shows as well, because it'd be good for our audience to hear what you all are doing. So, National Deer Association, I was kind of chuckling there as you were describing, some people think, why is there an organization for deer? Because they seem to be doing well. And yeah. Which, in one sense is true, because, man, there certainly isn't a shortage of them, at least in most places. But deer actually do face a lot of conservation challenges. And so everything ranging from disease to population overpopulation in some cases, which is actually a challenge for deer. And so the National Deer Association has been around we're not all that far, 35 years. So we're getting close to that, 35, 40 year mark now. We're going to be heading toward 40 years here. And we were formerly known as the Quality Deer Management Association.
QDMA.
And the mission, QDMA, that's right.
Yep.
And so about 2 years ago, I guess I shouldn't leave this part out, more than 2 years ago, going on 3 years ago now, we had a merger of the National Deer Alliance and the QDMA to create the National Deer Association. And so I don't want to bore people with all the details of that, but we're essentially what the QDMA was. And the mission, though, is, for the most part, has held pretty steady. I mean, our mission is to work to protect deer, hunters, and habitat, essentially. Okay, so we're the guardians of those things. We are really the only national deer organization that is, really focused on that mission of deer, hunters, and habitat. I mean, there are others that do a lot of fundraising and spread money out and give money to groups that are, related to hunting, deer hunting, all types of hunting. But our focus is truly the science and the policy that impact deer, hunters, and habitat. So we have I think we're a 23-person team now, spread out across the country. We have staff as far as California, but the majority are located along the Mississippi and east of the Mississippi, several in Pennsylvania, several in Georgia, and in the South as well. So, we have, I would encourage people to check us out at deerassociation.com and learn a little bit more there.
Sure. So do you guys represent deer hunters in general, or is it specifically whitetail? Do you dabble into any of the blacktail or the mule deer species?
Yeah, on a policy aspect, we do. So we're working on policy related to chronic wasting disease, for example. And there's a disease that impacts not only deer, but all deer species, but also elk and moose. So we would be involved there. We don't get involved though in like mule deer habitat work. There's the Mule Deer
Right.
Foundation that does that and does that part of it well. So we are definitely more heavily skewed toward whitetail, but not we're not exclusive to whitetail.
Sure. Well, that's good news because I know that the mule deer are facing some challenges as a result of the population dynamics of whitetail. Taking up habitat, occupying space. Even some just a lot of focus on the mule deer and the adversity that they're facing and the whitetail. So whitetail is contributing to that. So when you talk about, I think it's an interesting thing, and the overpopulation of whitetail deer. I think everybody would agree that in certain parts of this country that there are plenty of deer, and we laughed about that. So we're like, why are people out here creating habitat for deer? Why are they doing that? Why are they working on this stuff? But I want to specifically talk about the overpopulation issue. And from my perspective, as a professional, that was one of the biggest challenges within the DNR here in Indiana was trying to manage this population in a way that was responsible, but also helped resolve the issues, everything from agricultural damage to automobile collisions to, just private landowner, small home individuals who were, having deer eat down $10,000 worth of landscaping. So, what kind of issues are you seeing on a broad scale about this population issue in the places that it applies? I'm not talking about some place where there's a population shortage or an issue, and I'm not sure even where that would be at this point.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, there are a few places, but for the most part, yeah, I mean, that is not the case. I think the first thing I'd do is take a step back, and particularly as we advocate and teach people how to manage their land for deer, what we're not managing for is more of them in most cases.
Right.
So for us, good management means a sustainable population that is not an overpopulation. Harvest, and especially antlerless harvest of does is a big part of good conservation planning because that's how you control the population. And we've taught people over the years and continue to teach them that fewer deer means better deer and healthier deer. And it also means less conflict with things like you said, automobiles, agriculture, residential issues, disease, all of those things. And so we certainly encourage the harvest of deer. We do recognize though that everybody manages a little differently. There are certainly some folks out there, and I got to laugh whenever you were saying you can't work with deer hunters, and sometimes I feel like that too, and that's exactly what we do.
You can't work with houndsmen either.
Yeah, exactly. There's always somebody that has their own view of what they want to do, and so you get into private property rights and so on. And maybe somebody thinks that seeing 100 deer every time they go to the deer stand is a good, healthy thing. But we do our best to teach people that that's not the case. And so, the other thing I wanted to mention too is, I think one thing a lot of people don't realize, and we're working really hard to make this more known, is that about 80% of everybody who buys a hunting license is doing it to hunt a deer. And so when you consider all of the money that's generated for wildlife conservation, most of that money is being generated because people want to hunt deer. And so whether you want to hunt a raccoon or a ruffed grouse or what have you, you should care about deer hunters because they are paying a lot of the money that goes to state wildlife agencies for management. And even if you're somebody that if you're in Indianapolis and you have a bird feeder and you like to see songbirds, well, some of that is also being paid for the management of those are being paid for largely by deer hunters. So that's another reason why deer are so important. Love them or hate them, they're pretty important to the financial engine that fuels conservation.
But it wasn't always like that. I mean, in the early 70s, you still had a lot of small game hunters. I remember when I was hired in 1990, the most participated hunting season in state of Indiana was squirrel season. Believe it or not, I mean, it was squirrel season. It was it was a gateway to all kinds of hunting, and that was as late. It's not late now. I've got listeners that weren't born until the year 2000, but it's it's amazing to me to think that as recently ago as the year 1990, that was still the number one participated in hunting season was squirrel season. And yet
yes,
here we are in 2023, and when I retired in 2018, I would be fired up, every year at August 15th, that's when squirrel season came in. You always went to work that day hoping that it's like, yes, we're finally into the fall seasons, and from August 15th on, man, we're going to get into the hunting seasons. It's all coming now. And you'd go out and you'd talk to several people in our fish and wildlife areas and small woodlots and different things who were out squirrel hunting. And now it's like a ghost town. Nobody's doing it.
Yeah, I was smiling when you said squirrel hunting because I still like to go out, and I know I'm a rare breed that does that. But I certainly enjoy squirrel hunting, and yeah, that's the first animal that I harvested once I had a hunting license was a squirrel, and I'm going to guess that that's the case for a lot of people. So
me too. Yep,
yeah,
me too.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so those traditions certainly aren't what they used to be. Although I think we are seeing some growth in upland birds and waterfowl, which is good, and some other things. But and these things also are kind of cyclical. They kind of go in trends, and so yeah, I think a lot of those people that were hunting squirrels still hunted deer, and I think that was more the point that I was making. But certainly, yeah, less people now hunt small game and other animals. You were talking about hounds here. We didn't get into my background, but I grew up raising hounds.
I thought about that, man. You were introducing yourself, I was thinking, man, I missed a key point here that we need. The reason that we can find common ground with you, Nick, is let's talk about your background, and you're from Pennsylvania with your background with hounds, things like that.
Yeah, I grew up in a very rich hunting state in Pennsylvania. I mean, there's still tons and tons of hunters here. We don't have a million like we once had, but we still have an awful lot. Case in point, yesterday I'm trying to get my second antlerless license, and I had to wait in line online for half the day before my turn came up to even go buy one. So it's still pretty crazy here. But anyway, yeah, we used to raise red tick hounds and do a lot of raccoon hunting as a kid. I remember getting sideways with my mom once in a while because we would go out, and sometimes you get on a good chase and I wouldn't come home until it was already daylight the next morning and I was supposed to be at school. And so, yeah, we had some great hunts over the years, and had my own hound puppy as my brother did, and had a chance to raise the dog. And then, once it went on to college and so on, I got away from it a little bit, and then my dad got away from it. But whenever my wife and I got married and wanted to have a dog, I actually sought out and looked around in shelters until I found a red tick hound. And because one of the things I learned about hounds is what tremendous loyal pets that they are. And so my hound Arrow, now she's passed. We had to have her put down last April. She was 13 years old and had just run out of gas. But that dog was cool because I didn't get her because I wanted to hunt raccoons with her anymore. I originally trained her to trail deer, blood trail deer.
Right.
But then I got into the waterfowl world a little bit and worked for Delta Waterfowl Foundation. And instead of going out and getting a duck dog, I trained her to retrieve ducks.
No way.
Oh yeah, I have lots of pictures of them, and I always give people a good laugh when I show her sitting there on her little swamp stool and going out and retrieving ducks. And so hounds are great swimmers.
Yeah.
And so they laughed at me, and I said, the only thing this dog can't do is sit out in the cold for very long. So she's kind of an early season waterfowl dog. but anyone that's listening to this that raises hounds know those dogs, they love you and they'll do anything for you, and you can train them to do just about anything. And so, yeah, that was a very fond memories for my life is raising hounds and being around hounds. So I certainly have a deep appreciation for that culture for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I apologize for not bringing that up in the beginning, not only to you but to our listeners as well. I mean, that was a key element to this discussion we're having today. So, I've got to ask some questions about the hound and the waterfowl hunting, because we've been having some big debates about the trainability of hounds and how how much of it's genetic and how much of it is training and things like that. And what I think even as houndsmen, traditionally we're not looking for a hound for our audience that's going to retrieve ducks, but it's amazing that there's still that versatility that you can achieve that. So was she like good at it? Was she, describe the way she hunted and retrieved ducks? I mean, was it a forced retrieve? I got to get more information on that.
Sure, yeah, happy to. I think the most foundational thing to me was that, um, the hounds can be very loyal, and they will do anything for you, and they're willing to be trained if you have that tight relationship with them. And I think, I'm sure not everyone listening keeps their hounds in their home, but I did. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that creates sort of a special bond there. You spend a lot of time together, and you become buddies. And so that was the first thing. And then I would say beyond that, I think the first thing I needed to teach her in terms of the training was I needed to see how she would react to water, because I didn't really have her other than just around small streams and whatnot. I never had her jump into a lake or a slough and swim out. And
Right.
so that was the first thing I trained her on. I took her out to some ponds where there were some docks, and she loved to retrieve. So this dog would play ball all day long and run and catch a frisbee until she passed out. And so that was my lure to get her to jump in the water. She was reluctant at first, but then once she dove in the first time, then she would go a little bit further and a little bit further. And then I introduced her, changed from tennis balls to bumpers. And then with the bumpers, then what I did was I attached, you could buy duck wings, and I would
Mm-hmm.
attach duck wings to the bumper so that she would get used to that feel of feathers in her mouth. And then to the point where I introduced the sound of the shotgun blast, and then throw the bumper. And then she would put those things together in her head that, okay, I hear the blast, I see the splash in the water. And then when she was given the command, then she would just swim out there and bring the ducks back. And so the only thing I didn't teach her that came up whenever we were first hunting was, what if a duck is still just sort of, you know, flapping its wings or whatnot.
Right.
And so I could tell that was a little bit awkward for her the first time she brought a duck back that was, still kind of flapping. But yeah, she figured that out too. And I realized really quickly what a great swimmer she was. I mean, she was an excellent swimmer, and she loved to retrieve. And more than anything else, she just loved knowing that I was proud of her. And so she got lots of, love when she would bring a duck back. So yeah, I mean, she caught on really quickly, and I don't know that I did anything, um, really sort of outside the box. I just did some basic things that I thought
That's
would be
great. That's
a
an
good way to train
anomaly.
her.
It's an anomaly that she had that high, ball drive and, retrieve drive and things like that. I can only imagine the comments at the boat ramp, early in the mornings, loading your stuff in the boat, and somebody yells, "Who brought a coon dog to a duck hunt?"
Yeah.
Oh man, that's great. Was she
Well,
steady to shot and everything?
oh yeah, yeah, she was great. And to the point where then, um, I would have her around me, and maybe I was target shooting or shooting a handgun or something, and I forgot it, how driven she was, and I'd shoot, and she'd start running around looking for the duck. So I had to, show her that not all shooting necessarily means there's going to be a duck there. So,
Right.
but I would, to your point, and I mentioned about the cold. This is how spoiled this dog was. If she'd retrieve a couple ducks and it was kind of cold, then I would take her up to the truck and leave her sit in the warm truck while I hunted a little bit longer. So yeah, it was definitely interesting and fun.
Yeah. Well, we've the other key element here, and this is something I was going to get into anyway, was the commonality in our crowds, because we do several podcasts about deer recovery, with dogs, and we've done podcasts about training that. We've had Bavarian hound guys on here. We've had Yog Terrier guys with long spur. I know, Robert Miller from Miller's Tracking up in Michigan. He's a big supporter and listener of Heath Hyatt's podcast on Wednesday. And so, that's another reason why we want to have this conversation about bridging this gap between houndsmen and deer hunters. Dustin Machado down in Texas, he's got a great relationship with deer hunters because there's a service that they provide, and there's a need there from the deer hunting community, not to just write off all houndsmen as bad actors, because I'm not afraid to call out the bad actors. I did it for 28 years of my professional career. So sometimes I get a little brash on the mic and challenge people, but so when you were doing the deer recovery with your hound, was it more about just for personal and family use, or were you providing that service for other people as well there in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, no, it was just totally for personal use and to give her something to do, frankly. And I was just curious about it myself. And, I never got to finish training her because it was right toward, as it's sort of in the middle of her training, we moved to North Dakota, and that's when she became a duck dog. So, but no, I had no intention of doing it, commercially at all.
Right. Right. Well, that's a big deal now. You see come November, I was sitting back watching last year, just watching social media and follow some general hunting sites and different things, some specific deer hunting sites, the Indiana Bow Hunters Association. And I was amazed by the amount of requests out there for, recovery dogs. So it's definitely something that is gaining a lot of popularity, and hunters are starting to see the value of having a well-trained dog that can help them assist. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely growing, and it used to be you couldn't find someone that had a dog that would track a deer, and now people figured out they could make pretty good money at it and keep their dogs active too. So yeah, it's definitely growing.
Yeah. And maybe when I come on your podcast, we can talk about some of the things that deer hunters need to do if they want that dog to be successful when they show up. Well, we'll cover some of that on your podcast because it'll be more applicable there. But we've done several podcasts on that topic, and with being a former law enforcement canine handler, the concepts are the same of scene preservation and being just adding another layer to increase your success. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So getting back to the I think we just start off with, we've talked about this in other meetings when you and I have discussed things. I think at times you just have to break some eggs to make an omelet. You just gotta talk about the elephant in the room and just get that out of the way. And deer hunters, and I'm not trying to be, stereotypical or paint everybody with a broad brush, but I think we start where we look at the dynamics of the deer hunting community, and then compare that to, the amount of membership that you have. So how many deer hunters are you guys looking at as, across the United States? Do you guys have any hard numbers on anything like that? Hey folks, this is a great opportunity to tell you about a product I'm using right now that I've just flat got addicted to, and that is OnX. I'm in northern New Mexico right now as you're listening to this podcast, and we've been chasing bears. I came out here a few days early, took the opportunity to ride the ranch here, mark the trails, mark water sources, food sources, bear sign, all of that sort of stuff. And it helped me get to know this ranch. When a bear is started at the bottom and he's coming to the top, I don't have to try to find a trail. I've already got it mapped through the app. I mean, it's so easy. It's right there on your phone that you got with you all the time anyway. I want to tell you also a true story. This happened this morning when we were running a bear. The hounds were taking a track from the bottom of the canyon. They were going up through some rocky, ledgy country there. and they were headed towards the top of the mesa. I flipped open my Onyx, and boom, I know right where my trails are to get up there if I need to pack them up, if I need to, just get to the top of the mesa in a hurry. I already knew where that was because I'd already mapped it. I'd already laid my track from my buggy and was able to see where all the trails were coming out of this country. Also, the other part of the story is I couldn't actually get my handheld tracking device to orient properly and tell me exactly where the hounds were. So by opening up Onyx, I had an idea the country they were in. I could see all the terrain features. Super handy. You can get their elite package by going to our website, going to houndsmenxp.com, go to our partners page, click on the Onyx icon, and go to their website, and you will pick up 20% off of your elite subscription when you use the code HXP20. It's that easy, folks. Know where you stand with Onyx.
Yeah, you hear different things. Just a general rule of thumb, if you say 10 million, you're probably pretty close. It might be 12, but it's at least 10. I've seen different numbers, and it becomes challenging because you have some people that are in and then they're out for a while and back in. So those are typically the numbers that we use, but there's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. And then what kind of a percentage do you get for membership from that 10 million? What's your estimate on that?
Oh, it's horrible. And this is something we have done some research on. So deer hunters tend to be the worst joiners of groups like ours. So it's far less than 1% would be a member of the National Deer Association. It doesn't mean that they don't follow us or read what we put out there. We certainly influence way more than that 0.5%. But in terms of people that actually join, it's tiny, and so much so to the point where we created a free membership where all you have to do is just provide your email and mailing address and you get a membership for free. We have a basic membership because we realize it's not a way to fund your organization with membership. You fuel your organization with people who are interested and they participate in other ways. So it's small. It's not like waterfowl hunting, which is one of the highest,
right?
Join rates.
Mm-hmm. Does I said QDMA. I'm still stuck in that mindset. Sorry about that. Does the National Deer Association, are you guys doing chapter banquets, have chapters for the organization, things like that around the country?
Yeah, we do. We have branches. We call them branches. They're scattered across the country. We've just made some investments as well in that area, hiring a couple more people to help encourage the formation of those branches. Fundraising is part of what they do, but for me, I think it's more important that they are engaged in the mission of the organization, providing local leadership, and participating in the things that are fun. I think fundraising, people understand fundraising is important, but I don't think most people join because they want to go fundraise. I think they join because they want to take part in the mission, and so we're really pushing people to do that with the understanding that the fundraising then naturally will follow.
Yeah. I think that's a challenge. Membership is a challenge, even though houndsmen can be very supportive, but we're even seeing a dynamic now where there's less involvement in fraternal organizations, and that applies all across the board. I don't care if it's the VFW or the American Legion or what it is. Americans have become very poor joiners and supporters of their cause. They're not afraid to get on Facebook and be Facebook warriors and make their comments and things like that. And to me, that's like, standing out in the wind and beating the wind with your fists. It does no good. But as far as being joiners, it's something that we're seeing that's really taking a hit for sure.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because we've gone through all this when we just recently revamped all of our membership categories. And what we found is it's not that people don't care, or they're not engaging in your mission. Right. It's like when, we're probably similar age. And so there was a time when we joined something, we enjoyed getting that little plastic card in the mail that said we were a member of wherever. And these newer generations coming through don't value that as much. They value what we do and they want to participate in it, but they don't care as much about the membership, and so it's caused us to try to modernize and be more thoughtful about ways to engage those people without saying, hey, you have to send us, your $35 for a membership.
Right. Right. Well, I think that's one of the valuable things about discussing, you and I having a discussion is the fact that there's no doubt about it. The NDA and has established themselves as a credible voice in the hunting space, and also not only an influencer among deer hunters, but also an influencer as a credible voice with fish and wildlife managers. And so by starting discussions like this, we can learn from each other here and bolster our own interests, by watching people that are successful. Nobody watches, sits back and watches a loser and figures out how they're going to plan their life and plan their strategy.
Right.
If you want to see great things, then you watch great people and you watch great organizations. When the Secret Service trains their agents about how to spot counterfeits, they don't put counterfeit bills in front of them. They study the real thing. They study real money and learn every detail of the money. So you're never going to get anywhere watching people that aren't successful or watching the real thing. And one thing that nobody can argue with is the amount of influence that deer hunters and deer hunting organizations have on fish and wildlife managers. What do you think the key is to that? What's the key to your success there?
Well, I think the number one thing is that we are 100% driven by science. And so we don't allow ourselves to get involved with, the emotion of an issue. We recognize that sometimes the science says we should do something that maybe deer hunters don't like or appreciate. Okay. But we never waver from that. And so I think that's certainly gained us a lot of respect. We're talking about, hounds here, for example, some method of take, ways of hunting animals, that does not really matter to us as much as how we're managing populations, meaning there are a lot of ways to take deer out of the population. And so we don't
Sure.
get involved with whether or not you do it with a bow or whether you do it with a gun, a crossbow, a muzzleloader, whether you do it with hounds. That's not our issue. Our issue is the health of deer and habitat and herds.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't get into we just don't get into those emotional issues. And I think that's certainly gained us a lot of credibility. And we do a ton of work with state wildlife agencies. And even before I jumped on here, I was talking with someone, a federal partner that we work with. So I think that's where it starts.
So you keep everything science-based, leave the emotion out of it. I don't think most deer hunting organizations are from my experience, have been very influential. And now we're getting into the part of the conversation that we might have to break a little legs and maybe lay some things out, because I think a lot of times from listening to my audience, people feel like that, deer hunters walk in the room and they kick the door in and they get whatever they want. And they're not conscientious of what other sporting groups and supporting other sporting groups. The only thing they care about, and going back to the QDMA days, everybody thought that was an organization that we're just talking about growing big bucks. We gotta have those big bucks. Gotta have the wall hanger. Blah blah blah. And so in the wake of that, there's been this impression that deer hunters don't care about anything else besides growing big horns. Can you address that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that excuse me, I think the key thing you said there is impression. And so there's impression and then there's reality. Now, certainly in the early days of the Quality Deer Management Association, that was the time, like I said, we're going back 35 years ago now. That was a time where people were starting to hold, we used to actually have a slogan, let them go so they can grow. And so
Right.
There's no question that was the early roots. But even in those early roots, it was still driven by trying to limit populations, doe harvest more does. And it's funny, the organization at that time caught a lot of flack because people just couldn't understand, why would you want to shoot does? Because I want to see 50 deer out there. And
Right.
so that was the part of the message that was kind of lost in the beginning, was this idea that you need to reduce populations. And so at any rate, I think to the point that you're making, though, is as things evolved over the years and people started buying their own property, and that's never been bigger than it is now. I mean, there are several companies out there that really, exist to sell hunting property. I mean, I
Yes.
own property in Pennsylvania, and I get letters probably at least once a month from these companies that say, "Hey, we want to buy your land." So, um, and so what's happened is you've created this dynamic where people, in many cases, empty out their life savings or even use money they don't even have, and they find
Right.
a way to acquire property, and they become extremely protective of that property, and then that limits use by others and creates conflicts. And when there is a conflict, it becomes very I don't know if heated is the right word, but it's just a high intense moment when that happens, and
I've
because
been to
people are
I've
protecting that.
responded to some pretty heated moments over the years, Nick, between,
Yeah,
conflicting user groups.
yeah, exactly. And so, that is a side effect, I think, of people understanding, well, if I want a certain quality of hunting, the best way to do that is I can control it myself by having my own place to do it. And that's okay. I mean, I think that's perfectly fine. But then, the follow up to that is it does create more intensity and these sort of elevated environments where you do have conflict. And so, yeah, I mean, that was never an intention of anybody. It's just sort of a natural evolution of what happened there. I will say, as an organization, we recognize that, quite a while ago, and you won't see us use those terms that were used in the past. The whole "let them grow so they'll grow" type of thing. I mean, we are really a conservation organization broadly, and so that isn't our focus anymore. Now, we certainly aren't. We're not trying to pretend that we don't know that if you manage your deer herd better, you will have a chance to shoot older age class deer. That's certainly part of it, but
Hmm.
that's not what drives what it is that we do. So it's been an evolution for us as well.
As a leader in your organization, it seems like everybody that buys a hunting license within a few years becomes a conservation expert. They get a wildlife biology degree through Facebook and things like that. So I know that not everything that you do as an organization, you just get the masses falling in line and supporting everything you do. And you touched on something that was, pretty key. I remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, it wasn't anything to sit in a tree stand and see 30 or 40 deer, during
Mm.
archery season come through. And as we started changing our management plans and different things, now if you sit there and you're seeing 10 in a morning sit, that's a pretty good day, even for Southeast Indiana, where it was a destination place to deer hunt. So as a leader of your organization, how do you handle some of the dissenting opinions? Handle some of the I guess we just start out with what challenges you face as an organization and how you overcome those successfully to stay focused on your mission and continue to do the right thing for deer and deer hunters. I said deers. I sound like a hillbilly.
No, it's. I think it goes back to what I said earlier, and just being a science-based organization. If you stick to what the science says and you rely on peer-reviewed science, I think you keep yourself out of a lot of those troubles. We don't spend a lot of time trying to convince somebody that's got their mind made up that we don't have enough deer, for example. And so I think just staying out of those arguments, we have a lot of people that don't like us just because we say you should harvest does, or because we're not just strictly focused on shooting big deer and those types of things. So believe me, there are plenty of people that don't like us or don't like positions that we take. I can tell you, if there's let's say you weren't allowed to use. Well, we'll pick a neighboring state, Illinois. If you all of a sudden they pass legislation says everybody's allowed to use a crossbow now,
Hmm.
and so we would get asked to weigh in on that, and we would just simply say we don't weigh in on that because it has really little to do with the management of the species there. And so we have people mad at us because we don't weigh in to, to oppose crossbows. We actually would take the opposite stance and say it allows for more people to participate. And so we get a lot of people that get mad at us for those types of things. And there are some people that they try to deny that chronic wasting disease is a real thing and that it's a real issue to be concerned about, and they get mad at us because we follow the science and say no, it is important, and here's what we need to do to try to slow it down. And so it's just, if you always rely on the science and you don't allow yourself to be swayed by public opinion or political opinion, I think that keeps you, on the road and doesn't allow you to sort of get off track, and then all of a sudden you're having to defend weak positions. And so we are always and have always been, and it's something I'm really proud of, we have always been 100% science based, and that's how it's going to be, at least as long as I'm here anyway.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a very, even in 2023, after so much of our scientific community has come under scrutiny and been weaponized and everything else, nobody's weaponizing, whether there's nobody weaponizes some wildlife management. Some of it has been weaponized. You start taking the wolf and things like that, and there's definitely agendas, and the anti-hunters try to weaponize different issues all the time. But it's not going to change the world. World powers aren't sitting around worried about how many does are shot in Ohio County, Indiana.
That's right.
So,
yep.
Yeah, and that's where people start attaching their emotions to, it's hard for me to get my kids involved in hunting if you take them out there and they sit for 12 hours straight and don't see a deer, or you don't tree a raccoon, or you don't find a bear track. That attention spans are important. I'm more invested. It's, I can handle the ups and the downs, but trying to do introduction into stuff like that and not seeing some of that success, or at least getting to enjoy the experience of that, then it's tough. It's tough when you're trying to recruit new hunters.
Yeah, it is. And frankly, there are other species that are a little easier when you're trying to get people excited about hunting than deer hunting, for sure. I mean, deer hunting tends to be pretty solitary, and you can go a good amount of time without seeing
Right.
any deer. I mean, I think turkey hunting is exciting because even if you don't see one, you're probably going to hear one in most cases. So that gets you excited. Waterfowl hunting's fast moving. Even hound hunting. I mean, you're out there in the middle of the night chasing raccoons like I remember fondly as a kid, and there's always something going on,
Oh
and
yeah.
the dogs are out there working, and so yeah.
If you go out with a dog, and whether you're hunting squirrels or bears or raccoons or lions, it's something that's interactive. At least there's a dog in the picture. Kids can stay pretty focused, and I always call them the gate. It's like squirrel hunting with a dog or rabbit hunting with a good beagle is a gateway sport, that lifestyle that opens the gates. Who knows where a kid's going to go with their hunting career after that?
Yeah.
And because they don't have to sit quiet. Dad's not poking them in the ribs and saying, "Shh, be quiet, there's a deer coming." you know it's a whole different. I've taken several kids coon hunting over the years. If they get bored, they go down to the creek and they start skipping rocks and catching salamanders, and they're not interfering with anything.
Yeah, and I think the technology too of the hound hunting is cool now. It's not what we had growing up. I mean, we didn't have GPS collars where you could
Right.
watch where these dogs were, and I mean, you just had to be out there and you had to understand, you know, when a dog was treeing and how far out they might be and when it was time to call them back. And a lot of that has changed with just the technology, which, that's even fascinating. So like my son, he's only 6, but he's really fascinated by technology and maybe not so much yet being in the outdoors. And when you combine those things, I'll bet he'd get a kick out of seeing the hounds go out and watch them work and know where they were. And so it's just a different time now. And
Yeah.
I think it's all
Sure.
good.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into a controversial issue here, and I want to get your opinion on it. There is a lot of conflict between deer hunters and houndsmen at times, and a lot of talk about emotional type stuff, if you want to get emotional about stuff, then just, look at social media and read comments about, some of the conflicts between houndsmen and deer hunters. That'll get you emotional pretty quick. What do you think the root cause is for that? For, deer hunters being at odds with houndsmen, or houndsmen being at odds with deer hunters? Have you
Yeah, I
put any
mean,
thought into that?
oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, and we get asked to weigh in on this topic on the regular. Yeah, I don't know if it's one main thing. I think it's a few things. I think number one is a lack of awareness or understanding, maybe of each other. I could go out my door here in Pennsylvania. We don't have hound hunting for deer, and if I found the first 10 hunters and I asked them, "Hey, what do you think of hound hunting uh, or hunting deer with hounds?" They wouldn't know where to start because they wouldn't know much about it. It's just not part of the culture here.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that part of it, just the understanding. And I think the other part of it is something we talked about earlier, and that is when people make these investments in land, it's it's less about I think it's less about a concern of hunting deer with hounds than it is about protecting their property. And so I don't know, I don't have a lot of conversations with people on this issue, but I would say that very few people that I've talked to say that they hate the idea of being hunted with hounds. I think it's more so that they're concerned that this is one that we hear typically. So, hey, I bought this 1,000-acre property and I'm doing all these things and I'm sitting on my tree stand and I see 3 or 4 hounds running through all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I own my land is attached to about 5,000 acres of state land, and coyote hunting with hounds is still a big deal there. And I do occasionally will see a hound come through that's hunting a coyote. But there's a difference between that occasionally a hound comes through that may have come off the state land versus somebody that is showing up there on the regular trying to hunt your property with hounds.
Right.
And so I think it's understanding what the differences are. I think it's being willing to have a little bit of a tolerance on both sides of the issue. And unfortunately, I don't think it's something that Chris, you or I could solve. It's something that every individual is different in how they look at those things, whether it be this issue or political issues or whatnot. And you just hope that the majority can learn to understand each other a little bit and not immediately search for conflict, but search for reasonable resolution. I think it's okay to have a conversation. I say, Chris, yeah, I know you like to hunt with hounds, but the problem is I'm seeing them on my place, 3 or 4 times a week. That's a different conversation than, hey, Chris, one time last year your hounds came through my place and I'm not happy about it. I mean,
Right. Right.
you know what I mean? And so I think it just comes down to trying to hope that people can be reasonable on both sides of it.
Yeah, and there's bad actors. We've talked about that before. There's bad actors on wherever you go and whatever you do. You can't go to a baseball game, without finding bad actors there. That's why they have security.
That's right.
So, even your kid's little league game,
Oh,
you
believe me, I coach baseball and I
oh
see it.
man.
Yeah, I see it
Oh,
at every level for sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's for sure. Overreactive parents for their kid that's going to be an NBA star, but their dad's 5'7" and their mom's 4'10". It's like, hey, the chances of this kid being an NBA star just on physical is slim to none here. So,
that's
but
right.
yeah, um, when you say talking about, I'm just going to be real plain spoken here. Somebody getting their panties in a twist about seeing a hound on their place. I do know people that are like that are deer hunters. They just totally come unhinged because they see a hound on their place. And one of the things that is out there right away that houndsmen often will bow up about is the fact that our reaction is, my hounds aren't going to interrupt your deer hunting. So I want to give you an opportunity to address that mindset that my audience may have or use to justify the fact that their hounds were someplace that they didn't have permission to be. And I'm
So,
talking coon hunters, mainly raccoon hunters, are the ones that seem to have the big issue. The
oh,
whole
I see.
the whole hound hunting thing in the South, um, is kind of an isolated deal. It's regional, very regional, and it's got deep cultural stuff, and we'll talk about that as well. But let's talk about a broader spectrum of coon hunters who are have hunted in an area their whole life, and now they're seeing a base camp leasing sign come up, and they're
Mhm.
seeing no-till planters and different things roll into their country that they got to hunt that property for years, and now all of a sudden they've got a guy from Indianapolis with some jingle in his pocket that comes down and it's like, I saw your hound on my place a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that's just a fact of life, right? That's the reality of things. If somebody owns something that we want, but we don't own it,
Mm-hmm.
there's not anything any of us can do about that. And you just hope that you can find a relationship or just go right to that person as soon as they show up and say, "Hey, I just want to understand what your goals are, and I'll tell you what we've done." And if nothing else, we at least will know exactly where each other stands. I think that's all you can do in that case. Yeah, I think a big part of it too is just intent. Um, for me, like I said, I occasionally will see hounds come through my place. The intent there is not that somebody is purposely coming to my place and trying to hunt my place with their hounds. And they're in my area, it's primarily what they're hunting is coyotes. What has happened there is that they've entered the state land and their dogs have maybe taken a track across my place or whatever. Maybe they tried to call the dog and it didn't come back. It's intent, right? The intent is no big deal there, and so I don't worry about it. Now, I think if the intent was that somebody purposely and routinely is running their hounds through, that's a different story. But I just don't, like you said, there are bad actors, but I think those type of people are really few and far between. I mean, nobody, for the most part, is seeking conflict or wants to cause problems. And so I think, I would just hope that people, if you're a deer hunter and you have, a time or two seen a dog that was there that shouldn't be, then that's I hope you can understand that that happens on occasion. But if also though, if you're a hound hunter and your dogs are continually going onto a property and it's causing conflict, then you have to be the one to act and step away from that. And so it's a give and take. And I've seen a situation, and this isn't even hound hunting. This is people that have just pets, and their pets continually were going onto my buddy's property, and my buddy was trapping. And he went to the neighbor's house and he said, "Listen," he said, "I keep getting your dogs on my cameras. I have cameras over a lot of my trap sites so I can see what's happening. And I'm worried that they're going to get caught. So I would just ask you to please, be mindful of that." Well, literally within days, here's a picture of one of their dogs in his trap. And
Right.
so he did his thing. He went to their house and asked them not to do it. And then to the point where their dog ends up in a trap over it. So you hope that again on both sides of the issue that people can come to some sort of agreement. And hey, if you're you're in an area where someone just is very intense and doesn't want you on their land, then you have to respect that, even as disappointing as it may be. But I would hope that situation is more rare.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of it is I know several people that, and I'm even guilty of this myself. I have some places here that I've just had not guilty of it, I guess. I guess I just built a relationship with landowners where I don't have to call them. I don't even have to ask them every year. I see them at the feed store. I see them at the corner store. I see them in my community. They know that I hound hunt. If they see my truck parked, they're not worried about it because I've got that relationship with them. I go to church with them, whatever. It's more of a relationship building type thing. And for for me personally, just speaking from my own perspective, building that relationship with someone who is an absentee landowner in an area that is a destination place for people who want to hunt whitetail deer is a challenge. It's a challenge. It's not, I'm not saying it can't be had, but it is a challenge. So let's talk about some solutions to being able to build that relationship. And so, and I'll just getting right down to the brass tacks of it. There's certain places where I'll see a new lease sign come up or a new landowner pops up with onX. There's no excuse for people not to know where property lines are and who the landowners are. I was using GIS systems 30 years ago to track landowners and get permission. but I still get that gut feeling down in my gut, it butts up next to a traditional piece of property that I still have permission on. Now I'm like, okay, who are these guys? I know they're going to have cell phone cameras out there. And my first fear is I don't want to get a hound shot because of an ignorant deer hunter that thinks that it's okay to whack my dog. So let's talk about some solutions and how we build effective relationships with guys that are buying up or leasing big tracts of land to deer hunt on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just communication. I mean, that solves a lot of issues. I mean, you go out on the town, right? And you see someone that you might, that you're attracted to, and you might want to ask them on a date, right? So you got two choices. You can either go up and talk to them, or you can sit there and say, well, there's no way that person would accept a date with me. And then you just give up, right? Which that happens a lot. Like, I
Yeah, it
think
does.
how
That's
many
a good
times
example.
you thought, ask the girl out because you thought she'd tell you no, right?
Right.
And so I think it's very similar with this situation. You just have the conversation like, hey, I'm just coming over here. This is who I am. Want to introduce myself. I occasionally hunt with my hounds on the neighboring property. I wanted to make you aware of that. Just wanted to get your feelings on it. And then you have a conversation. You'll know immediately what you're dealing with. You're either a reasonable person. You may agree to disagree, but at least you know what you're dealing with. And then you can, shape your actions accordingly.
Imagine if I pulled in, it's midday. I see guys around the truck or around the camper or wherever, and I pull in and I just introduce myself and start building that relationship. And now all of a sudden they're putting a face with this hound that they may see on their camera. And it's a lot of after you've built that relationship and people know that you're harmless, I don't want my hound somewhere that they're going to be in danger or they're going to cause me drama or any of that stuff. But it is getting harder. I mean, it gets harder every year. But I'm not coon hunting in the middle of the day on opening day of firearms season, and those are great days. Great. That whole week before firearms season comes here in Indiana, guys will come in and they'll make sure their stands are set. They'll maybe bow hunt in the morning, in the afternoon. They're just kind of hanging out and enjoying deer camp. And you can pull in there and share a beer with them or whatever, in the evenings around the campfire. At that point, it's a lot harder to, wish ill on somebody when you've broken bread with them. I think it's huge.
Oh, it is. I think another thing too, I was thinking of this when you were talking there is, I would invite people to go along, say, hey, I'm going to go out and we're going to go out this evening and do some raccoon hunting or whatever, and invite them so that they can see what it's all about, because it's pretty fascinating stuff. I mean, I haven't gone, or I haven't owned hounds to hunt, raccoons or coyotes for a long time, but a friend of mine still is very active. And just a few years ago, I said, "Hey, I'd really like to go again." I just had a great time because I wasn't used to the GPS situation as it is now,
Right.
and that was a cool whole new aspect for me. And we went out and we shot a couple coons, and we actually were on my place, which is largely a deer hunting place, and so we went out there, and that was really cool. And frankly, I wish I did more of it, because it's just, I'll let him handle taking care of all the dogs and, paying to feed them. And then I'll just
Right.
go out and enjoy it once in a while. So I think that could help too, it would give people a better understanding of what it's all about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I loved your analogy about asking the girl out for a date, because I know so many people, even deer hunters, I used to have some guys that came in here and hunted, and it's like, man, I saw a really good place down the road. That looks like a great place to deer hunt. I wonder if they'd let me hunt. And my reaction was always the same. It's like, you'll never know unless you walk up there to that door and you ask them. And the same way goes for us as houndsmen. We can find that common ground. And the thing about deer hunters get really possessive of their property, usually from about, the 1st of August to the end of December, and I don't understand all of it. I don't agree with all of it, but I do respect that that's their property. I can get access to that property the rest of the year if I'm just not an asshole.
Right. That goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you pull in there, it's like, yeah, I just thought I'd let you know that I hound hunt this area, and you might see my dogs on your cameras, and, have this attitude that's just the way it's going to be. That's not good relationship building. And you might want to, read a couple books like How to Win Friends and Influence People, because you suck at making friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there will always be those extreme examples, and you just hope that they're few and far between. And as you said, there are bad actors on both sides, and there are some people that are just looking for a fight or looking for trouble too. So
yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Well, what kind of plans does I mean, there's so much stuff we could talk about, with my former occupation. I've got a lot of experience with the, deer management, stuff like that. People can get all that information from your podcast. You guys cover all that stuff on those podcasts all the time. So, what do you guys got in the works coming up?
Yeah, so there's never, we used to talk about, well, when it slows down, right? Nothing ever slows down anymore.
Right.
So
Right.
I think we're continually putting out educational information on everything from how to cut a tree down to what all different species benefit because you're managing for deer, right? And so if people are unfamiliar with us and are interested in that stuff, I would encourage them to not just our website, because even websites are kind of outdated anymore, but we do a ton of stuff on our Facebook page, all of our Instagram. We even have a TikTok account, and we're spending a lot of time just educating people about the value of deer broadly and why deer are so important to all the things that we do. And so all of our accounts are just deer association. So you just go to Google, type in deer association, you'll find all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing a lot of large scale forestry type projects now with the U.S. Forest Service. So I look for that to expand. We're getting more and more involved with on the ground large scale projects. So that's something we're doing. We also have a really cool program called Field to Fork, where we're taking out people who have always wanted to try deer hunting but never had the opportunity to do it, and we take them for the first time, teach them how to do it. That program continues to grow in popularity and has been very successful for us. It might even be something that you may want to consider with your organization, is a program where you introduce people to hound hunting, and just you may take people that they have no interest in maybe shooting anything, but just want to see what the culture is all about. And that gets back to the education. And so we're doing a lot of that work as well. So pretty much anything deer science, policy, we're involved in it, and heavily active.
Right. Right. Yeah. We partner with an organization called Freedom Hunters,
Mm-hmm.
and taking America's veterans back out there, and we help houndsmen across the country that want to get involved in that. One of the things that I wanted to touch on that we haven't talked about yet is, that there's no doubt about it that hunting with hounds is one of those things that's under fire, and it's a favorite target for the anti-hunting crowd. And too many times I see deer hunters who are more than happy to feed us to the wolves, and even talk about the fact that hunting with hounds is not fair chase. As a houndsman yourself, how do you address that issue when you hear people from your own community trying to, make statements that hunting with hounds is not fair chase.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets back to some of the stuff we talked about before, and that is that we're a science-based organization. And so we're not an organization that concerns itself. Let me say that to make sure I say this the right way. We care about fair chase, okay, but we don't try to define what that is necessarily. Okay, we certainly wouldn't characterize hunting with hounds as not being a fair chase hunt, okay, for your purposes.
As an organization.
No, right. Yeah,
Right.
we don't have any policy. We have no policies that oppose hound hunting. Our policy is simply this, that we support whatever the state wildlife agency determines is the legal method or way of pursuing deer. And as long as those things aren't hampering deer populations or hurting habitat and hunters in some way, then that's what we support. And so in these states that have deer hunting with hounds, we don't oppose that. We just, again, we're focused on the science of the issue. Now we certainly support property rights, but I think anybody would support property rights. And, to your point, you're always concerned about that. And so I think that would be in line with anybody that's reasonably thinking about the situation. But no, we don't take positions against hunting with hounds or any of those types of things. In terms of the anti-hunting crowd, I mean, there are organizations that deal with that directly. We try not to involve ourselves with that too much, although we certainly support policy and legislation to allow things like, for example, we had one recently in, I think it was New York, where they had legislation to ban the coyote contests.
Right.
And so, again, scientifically, we know that a contest, frankly, is a way to get people out and participate in predator management. And it's not going to harm coyote populations. And it really is more of an attack on hunting generally. Well, we certainly will sign on to letters and support opposition to legislation like that, things that are driven by emotion and not the science of the issue.
Sure. Yeah. So the biggest thing that I can't understand, and maybe you can help me with this. If I was a cattle farmer and I have a tree fall on my fence and my cows get out and they're standing in your food plot, I don't know a deer hunter that's not going to say, "Hey, come over here and get your cows. I need, please." They probably don't even need to get permission to do it. It's like, get those cows out of here. But it seems like that when it's a hound and it's a hunter, then people get a lot more emotionally charged about it because they feel like that they're being infringed upon. So, why is there such emotion behind? Is it just they feel like it's a lack of respect for their property at that point? Why did deer hunters get so wound up about that? Because things happen when you turn a hound loose. I don't care if you've got a good recall on them or not. You lose signal, and let me lay this out a little bit. You lose signal with your GPS collar. You lose track of where your dog is, and the next time you get signal, holy crap, he's right in the middle of, Joe the bow hunter's big hunting lease. It wasn't intentional.
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer that for everybody because, again, everybody's personality is a little bit different. I have, ironically, you bring up cows. I'm aware of more than one occasion where people's cows got loose and went in and ate up somebody's food plots.
Sure.
So that actually does happen, which is it's kind of crazy. I actually remember a case in Illinois where there was a rogue donkey running around that kept showing up in a food plot that we were getting on a trail camera, which is kind of neat. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I think it just gets back to this very sort of protective. This is mine. I paid my hard-earned money for it. I'm breaking my back out here doing X, Y, and Z. And so because of that, it creates this very reactionary, whether it's someone hunting hounds or frankly, if it's just a neighbor that gets lost and wanders onto the property. I think it's that trespassing in general, and they just automatically assume somebody's there with bad intentions.
Sure.
So I'm not sure how to solve that one, but I think that's where a lot of it comes from.
Yeah, this is a magnified example, but if you own an acre lot and all of a sudden you see some guy out rummaging around in your bushes, looking behind your bushes and different, you're going to come out of the house and you're going to ask questions. You're going to confront that person, and come to find out that were visiting a neighbor 2 blocks away and their dog's gone, and they saw their dog or their, run up behind the bushes. There's still an expectation that you're probably going to get asked some questions at that point. Why are you looking behind the shrubs? Are you looking, so like I said, it's a magnified example, but it's, so in those cases where the cows got out, was there some financial ramifications? Are you seeing deer managers now that they're seeking restitution for damage for deer plots in situations like that?
Yeah, I have not seen that specifically. No, I just know that
I was just curious.
the guy, yeah, the people that told the story in both cases were, they were frustrated, but not like to the point of, it's just one of those things that happened, right? It's like,
Yeah,
I couldn't believe it. He come in and ate out my entire food plot, and I don't know if the farmer in that case pitched in and replanted or what, but it was just when you had mentioned that issue, I thought, well, that's funny because that has actually happened. So
yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Well, Nick, again, I think we're running a little bit long. I know you're a busy guy for sure, and I don't put time limits on the podcast. I could talk to you for hours about issues, but I think the main thing is, you can sit around and cry about spilled milk or things that have happened in the past, but the only way that all of us continue to enjoy hunting to the fullest and have the best experiences we can, these groups like yours and the houndsman groups out there, the trappers, fishermen, I don't care what it is, in this 21st century environment, we have to find common ground and find places that we come together, and not always looking for ways to divide us. So I really appreciate you taking time to come on the podcast and tell us about what you guys are really all about. Remove some of the cloak and dagger, smoke and mirrors, predisposed idea, paradigm paralysis, whatever you want to call it, that you can't work with deer hunters, because I know that's not true. I've seen it happen with our state organization. Got good friends that are in the Bow Hunters Association. They've been there for houndsmen in the past. So I appreciate your time to come on the podcast and introduce us to the National Deer Association.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. It was my pleasure, and I look forward to having you likewise on our podcast as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Can't tell you how much your listener support means to us. Just downloading and listening to this podcast is huge for us. I never thought we would be able to have so many great supporters out there when we started this thing. So I just want to take the opportunity to say thanks, and make sure you're checking out houndsmenxp.com. Got a lot of good information there for you, places for you to listen to the podcast, merchandise. It all goes to help support this podcast and build relationships with organizations that are well established that can help us secure a future for hound hunting. So, and all hunting. So guys like Nick coming on the podcast wouldn't be possible without your support, and we really appreciate that. So Nick, I look forward to making an appearance on your podcast. And till next time, thanks for listening to Houndsman XP. This is Fair Chase.
At Discount Tire,